It's pretty wild to think that a geopolitical conflict happening thousands of kilometers away could ignite a massive crisis right in the middle of millions of Indian kitchens. A single blocked shipping lane has left 1.4 billion people scrambling for cooking gas, and the consequences, well, they're truly devastating.
And this is where it gets incredibly real. We're not just talking about supply chains or economics here. We're talking about human lives. Mr. Mittal's tragic death is just a shocking reminder of the real cost of the shortage. He was one of several elderly citizens who've lost their lives simply waiting in line for something everyone should have.
And this is the price of pure desperation. Think about this. A domestic cylinder that's supposed to cost around 900 rupees is now being sold on the black market in cities like Delhi for 3,000 rupees. It's a price that so many people just can't afford, but they're being forced to pay it. Tragically, Mr. Mittal's story isn't an isolated one, not at all. This crisis has sent shockwaves through every level of Indian society, hitting individual families and the entire national economy hard. The picture this paints is, well, it's pretty grim. Online booking systems are crashing, forcing hundreds of thousands of people into these massive queues for hours on end. We're seeing up to 30% of restaurants in big cities just shutting their doors. Food delivery orders, they've been cut in half. It's gotten so bad that we're even hearing reports of cylinder theft, looting, and police having to guard the trucks that are just trying to transport the gas. So the big question is, how did we get here? How did the world's fifth largest economy suddenly run out of cooking gas? Well, the immediate trigger, the spark that lit this fire, lies in a tiny strip of water halfway across the globe. The Strait of Hormuz, it's just 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, but it's like a major artery for the planet's energy supply. A conflict between the US and Iran has led to its closure, and that has effectively choked off a huge portion of the world's energy. And this is where you can see India's vulnerability laid bare. Sure, about 40% of its LPG is produced right here at home, but a staggering 54%, that's more than half of the entire nation's supply, comes through that one single, now blocked Strait of Hormuz. So when that one route closes, the whole system just breaks. But here's the thing. That blockade, it's just the trigger. It's not the real problem. The real reason this blew up into a full-blown crisis is a much deeper, pre-existing issue. India was simply not prepared. There was no safety net. Just look at this number, 33 crore. That's 330 million Indian households. That's how many families had their main source of cooking fuel put at risk almost overnight, all because of a systemic failure to plan for a disaster like this. Now, to really get why this happened, you need to understand the difference between two things: supply flow versus strategic storage. India has invested in supply flow. Think of these as pipelines and underground caves designed to keep gas moving for everyday use. But what it has totally failed to build is strategic storage, a massive emergency reserve, a stockpile designed to absorb exactly this kind of shock. And this is the result. This is the number you really need to remember. India's total dedicated storage capacity for LPG is less than 2 days of national consumption. Just let that sink in for a second. A country of 1.4 billion people has less than a 48-hour buffer of cooking gas. So the entire system is built on this fragile, just-in-time model. It relies on ships showing up exactly on time every single day. The moment those ships stop coming, like they have now, the buffer is, well, it's basically zero. We expanded all these LPG connections with schemes like Ujjwala, which was great, but the crucial infrastructure needed to support them, it just didn't keep up. So, with the crisis getting worse by the day, how did the government respond? Well, this is where things get interesting, because what was being said officially and what was actually being done seemed to tell two very different stories. So here's the official line. On March 12th, the petroleum minister stood up in Parliament and said there was no shortage. He claimed that the empty cylinders and the long lines were simply the result of people panic buying and hoarding. And yet, look at what was happening on the ground at the very same time. Just days before that statement, prices were hiked. Refineries were ordered to go into overdrive and maximize production. Severe rationing started, capping supply for businesses at just 20% and forcing people to wait up to 45 days between bookings. And then, they even banned households that have piped gas from booking cylinders at all. These don't really sound like the actions of a government just dealing with a little panic buying, do they? Now, emergency supplies have started arriving from places like the US and Russia, which is good news. But you have to look at the scale of this problem. A recent shipment of almost 93,000 tons. It sounds like a lot, right? But as you can see from this chart, it's just a tiny drop in a massive ocean. It barely covers a single day of what the nation needs. All right, so all of this brings us to the most important question of all. What happens now? The road ahead definitely looks challenging, but there are some important things to know and even some steps that you can take. Experts are estimating that, on the low end, this crisis could easily continue for another 4 to 8 weeks. Yeah, that's the realistic timeline until either the geopolitical mess is sorted out or more stable alternative supply lines are fully up and running. So what can you actually do? Well, first, if your electricity is reliable, think about getting an induction cooktop as a backup. Second, check if piped natural gas, or PNG, is an option in your area. Third, if you see black marketing, please report it. It's a criminal offense. And finally, and this is a big one, please avoid panic buying. Hoarding an extra cylinder just makes the shortage that much worse for your neighbors. But we have to be honest here. The tragic reality is that for millions of people, especially in rural India, these just aren't options. Their only real alternative is to go back to the mud chula, the traditional clay stove. And this just erases years and years of progress that was made to free women and children from the incredibly harmful smoke that used to fill their homes. Look, the Strait of Hormuz will reopen eventually. The supply ships will return and the cylinders will be refilled, but that fundamental vulnerability, the weakness that caused this whole crisis in the first place, that's not going anywhere. So the real question we're all left with is this. What long-term policies have to be put in place to make sure that the kitchens of 330 million Indian households are never, ever this dangerously exposed again?